Welcome. You are at the CCC,
where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm a 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych, an addict and alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you.
I'm not seeing anything.
And I'm LouiLou. I'm LouiLou. I am in recovery for crystal meth alcohol. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a former Miss Castro Country Club, and I am always in search of balance. And each week we will provide and create a brave space where we can engage in conversations around topics of recovery.
Our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
But before we do that, please like, share, and comment on this episode. Ding that bell.
And now the disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on at the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material and information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we are just friends behind a mic here to entertain you.
Wiki, wiki, wiki.
Wiki, wiki, wiki.
Wow.
And Bonnie Violet's here.
Bonnie Violet,
Hey.
hi. I was hesitant. I was waiting for Bonnie to.
I was
Bonnie
like, no,
Violet to
I'm the
introduce herself.
guest. I'm the
Yeah,
guest.
I don't know what the hell happened during the introduction.
Well, I know. It's like,
It was kind of cute
Silly.
from my
Like
point
fell
of view. The
apart.
audience might not have enjoyed
Yeah,
it, but
well,
I
it's-
did.
oh, that wasn't very professional.
Yeah, I don't think we aim
I
for
don't think they
professional.
come
I
here
don't.
for that.
Yeah, I don't. Professional isn't like our thing.
No.
Yeah, if you want professional.
Like mediocre with personality.
Yeah. We are a C plus.
right. The CCC.
Well, Minnie Happy Returns often says she gives a C plus performance. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, especially when I'm hosting, because I don't have to do much more. Because what I don't do in performance, I make up for in hosting.
I strive to be the Snapple of co-host. Do you remember this? How Snapple was like ranked? Is that lost on y'all? Do you remember that commercial where Snapple was like lauding that they were number 3?
Yeah, we're
like
gonna take the ride
like
with you.
RuPaul's Drag Race when people are fighting over who's in second last season.
Oh, is that what that
you
was?
mean?
Oh my god!
Yeah,
right?
sure. Is
I'm
that
like,
what happened?
I'm in second. No, I'm in second.
Yeah,
It's like
you
you
still
both
didn't win.
lost.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Bitch, none of you got
Wah,
it.
wah, wah.
So shall we begin in the usual way?
Yes.
Yes.
How is everyone doing?
How are you, Bonnie? Let's start with you.
Yeah, let's start with you.
I'm
Bonnie
doing
Violet.
great. I'm in the Bay.
You are
in the
that's-
Bay.
That's nice. I'm here for a couple of weeks.
You
doing
are.
some work. I did. Sunday was we did communion. We served communion in the Castro and Drag, which are like these rainbow chip cupcakes. And I preached from the pulpit.
Oh,
nice.
shit.
And I talked about grace and shit. It was cool.
I love
And not
that.
shit, but grace.
No, I love it. I think
Yeah.
that's great. Well, when you say pulpit, were you in a church? Were you outside?
I was in a church with the stained glass behind me and people
That's
in
really-
the front. And,
Nice.
That's
and I
dope.
was in drag.
That's dope.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. Was there like a take home message from the sermon that you would want to share with us?
I mean, it was like on grace, you
Okay.
know? And so it's just that idea of like not feeling ashamed, it's LGBTQ stuff. And so I talked mainly on queer grace.
Mm.
So it was really great. It was really cool.
I love that. It sounds timely. It sounds perfect.
It was, helpful.
Yeah. Lewis, how about you? How are you?
I am good. I'm good. I'm happy the Bonnie Violet's here. Happy Pride Week. It's
Happy
like,
Pride Week.
it's-
Yes.
You can feel the energy, and even in today, it's like the weather was nice. I always say that the Lord loves the homosexual because the weather usually is pretty.
She
It's
made
usually
us.
perfect.
Yes,
It's
like,
usually
well,
perfect.
It's
during
like
Pride.
raining and snowing
Mm.
before, and by the time you get to Sunday, it's like yeah. And
Hi. Sorry, go ahead.
So for those who don't know, every year we do a pageant for the Castro Country Club, and so we had the Castro Country Club pageant, and so we have a newest Castro Country Club, which is super exciting. Tongalele.
Dongolele. I was one of her dressers, and I had such a good time back
That's
there.
hot.
Dongolele is by far one of my favorite people.
Yeah,
Hey,
they're
did
really
you
great.
know, Brandon, that we can see the comments here? So it says
No.
Nora. Yeah, Nora said hi, family. Can you see that? Oh,
Hi,
see,
Nora.
now you've sent it to us.
Oh,
Oh,
You know what,
you just gave us the back door
that's
to the comments.
why.
We don't have to,
that's why he doesn't want us looking at it.
because then we don't
Because
need
we
them.
make a thing about it.
But Brandon, the thing is that we need you. That's the thing.
Whoops.
So
Sorry
not
about that,
surprisingly,
Brandon.
no one's asked me how I'm doing.
How are
We're
you
back to
doing?
We're
that.
waiting
Well,
for
you
you
were
to
talking.
say. We're
Yeah,
waiting for you to say, well,
We were trying not to be
No,
rude
I'm
and
totally.
that-
I just.
Anthony, how are
It's
you?
become a shtick. Well, I don't want to tell you anymore.
Oh, I'm
actually I was actually sharing with Lewis before we start. I think you were here too. I'm just really tired. I have a lot of stuff going on, a lot of great things. I was actually talking to my sponsor today about them. Like I have like my proposal is due at the end of this month. Well, the first 3 chapters are due at the end of this month. So I've been writing away. I sit for orals on July 15th for folks that aren't sure what that means. I know I sent that in a text and someone goes, how do I sit for orals?
I know exactly. I thought you were going to be on your knees for orals.
No, I'm sitting for, so basically
position.
I wasn't going to say anything and Bonnie Violet looked over at me.
I know,
and
I saw. I was like, you know
yeah.
what? I just need to let people know what that is now. So orals basically is when you, there's a bunch of different ways that it can happen. We're so fucking tacky. So, but basically you sit before a panel and they look at the work that you've written. So basically, and they grill you for about 2 to 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
They ask you questions about everything you've written. They've asked you questions about, like people you may have cited. They might pop quiz you. They'd say, you know, like you cited so-and-so on page 37.
I thought you were going to say they might penetrate you.
No, that's...
They like pummel you.
Yeah, they pummel you. They penetrate you with questions.
Plow you.
But it can be a very intimidating process. And so like I need to be on my A game. And then on top of that, you know, like I'm preparing my pre-doc materials. And so I've just been really busy. Awesome. But all good things, right? Like I get to be in this graduate program. I get to do all of these things. So I've been in a really good place, just tired and in need of rest.
How has that break felt?
What break?
From like, you took like a little break from school and now it's kind of coming back again.
Oh, so it wasn't a break.
Oh,
no. What that was I delayed my application by a year.
I got you.
So I gave myself an extra year to do research and write and prepare my materials.
And it's gone by really quick.
I know.
It's gone by super fast.
It felt like you just said that.
Yeah. It went by really quickly. And as I was going to say, as God as my witness, I don't know why that was the transition I was choosing because it doesn't match. But like the thing is that it is by far like it was like one of the best decisions I made. One of the best decisions I made. Yeah. So let's not talk too much about me. Let's ease into our topic, which is intersectional allyship. Intersectional allyship.
Hashtag don't be an asshole.
Hashtag don't be an asshole. Hashtag we can be better to each other.
I like that better.
I know. Yeah. I like that. That's pretty good. How long are you working on that?
You're a dick. So that's an example.
We went right back.
I mean,
we were doing
do as we say and not as we do.
It just came to me now. I was something came over me. I was feeling. All right, so intersectional allyship. I believe Bonnie Violet, this was one of your ideas, wasn't it? To talk about intersectional allyship.
Yeah, with pride and stuff.
Yeah,
because and the allyship is in the sense of like, if you are like, how do you support people who are in recovery? Like, how do you be an ally for people in recovery? But then also, how can you also be thinking about other intersections while supporting people in recovery? Whether you're a person in recovery who's supporting somebody in recovery, or you're in recovery with other people in recovery, and and keeping in mind how race and gender and sexual orientation and socioeconomic status and disability, and all those sorts of things that begin to create different experiences for everyone.
Yeah,
and just kind of being aware of it.
Yeah. I love that. I'll add to that. So one, I just wanted to give a shout out. There's a really great resource on intersectionality. It was created by the UN Women, so United Nations Women. It's a toolkit. It's called the Intersectionality Resource Guide and Toolkit. I found that particularly helpful in preparing for today's show. And so for folks who may not be familiar with the idea of intersectionality, it was a term that was coined in 1989 by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw. And the idea was to talk about identities and power, which was basically what Bonnie Violet was saying, which is like, how can we better show up for each other? And what does a conversation about power and identities look like, right? So there was that. The other, some other things I found, like different ways of allyship. So like one of the three I don't know if they're the three most common, but like speaking up on behalf of people or extending opportunities to people if you're in a position of power. challenging the status quo, right? So different ways that allyship
Speaking
can
up,
look.
but more actually what I've learned in recent years, more importantly, not speaking up, maybe listening, being quiet.
Yeah, which is interesting because one of the things I came across in the toolkit is they talk about, I don't know if it was in the toolkit, but it was in something I read about how a lot of allyship is unlearning and reevaluating, like unlearning shit that like we didn't know we needed to unlearn, or reevaluating like our interactions and our position in the world.
Also, another thing, because I was a part of this. There was this group on Clubhouse. If you're familiar, it's like online kind of chat groups or whatever, and it was really popular during the height of like shelter in place. And one of the toughest lessons I learned or shared, at first it rubbed me the wrong way, but I understand I am not an ally just because I say I'm an ally. I have actions that are required, and I have to do that work in conjunction with whoever I'm trying to be an ally to.
Right. That's I think what you're talking about is super important, right? Which is we are allies in partnership with the people that we're wanting to be allies to, and also like I feel like there's also a part there where to some degree I feel like there needs to be an invitation, or there has to be an opening there, because sometimes people don't need you to like speak on their behalf, you know, like there are people within community, for me, for example, who will speak on like racial issues where I'm like, ooh, number one, not only do I not agree with you, but number two, like, do not rope me into this.
But allyship is relational. It's like, and I think the thing that's important about allyship, there are some like, you know, common characteristics of what allyship might look like. But I think for me, one of the things that I've learned is that when I'm an ally for people, and that's beyond just being friends with people who are different than myself, but when I'm an ally for somebody else, I really have to be mindful of what other people like, because I've had folks who have wanted me to speak up for them when I didn't. And I had folks tell me, don't speak up for me. I can speak up for myself. And I remember also like whenever there's like a shooting or a killing, or whether it's, you know, in a gay bar or it's a police brutality or any of those sorts of things, you know, and they say, check in on your people, right? On the people who might be impacted by what's happening. And I think that can go both ways. You know, like for some people it'd be good that they hear from their white friend or from their straight friend.
Are you saying I should reach out to my white friends? How do you feel about that white guy shooting up that church?
Right? I know. I mean, that's a good ally, right?
No, exactly.
Before we get too far, I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about what are examples of intersectionality, right? So I love the examples that you gave. So for example, I think an example of intersection, or like my own intersections, for example, might be like, I'm a man, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm in recovery, I'm gay. I was going to get there. Also, in talking about intersectionality, you get to decide what your identities are. You know what I mean? Not having someone across the table tell you what they are.
But
but
the beautiful thing about intersectionality, or this idea of coming to the forefront as making it, centering it or whatever, is that you get to kind of address all these areas of your these parts of you, because I'm not just a gay man, I'm not just a black man.
That's right.
There's so many pieces, so many parts to me.
But I think it's I like that you said that you get to say how you are, but I think what also plays in that is how other people perceive you.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and I think especially if you're somebody who is experiencing privilege, you are often oblivious to the fact that people are having a different experience for you. So you wouldn't identify as ... Like I knew, like, because I grew up in a trailer house, I thought like, you know, I was poor, I didn't have access to things. And I used to, when I was younger, I'd think like, oh, I know what it's like to be black or brown, or which is totally embarrassing that I ever thought that. But I thought one oppression equals another oppression, and they're the same. Right. And it's not about like competition, but it's important to realize that those are two different experiences.
Right. Exactly. And so just kind of like distilling down what we said. So basically, intersections have to do with all the different identities that a person might have and how those things overlap, right? And then allyship, and connecting that, allyship is like, given all of those intersections that a person might have or a community might have, how can you be supportive, right? I just kind of, because it seems kind of like, I was thinking about it and I was like, this is actually kind of like complicated. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like some of this I wasn't even I don't think I had like clear language for it until like I went back and was actually like looking at stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's go back to what you were saying. The example of allyship and recovery, right? I think a comment came in. Oh, this is why he doesn't want us to see it, because now we're distracted.
100%. Check your privilege cards.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Does that say Veronica?
Veronica.
It's so far away, Veronica.
Oh.
Thank you, Veronica. And maybe, before we move on, let's talk a little bit about what does privilege mean. We often talk about what privilege is, but maybe let's give that some context. Do you have any thoughts?
When I think about privilege, or when I'm talking to somebody, when I care enough, like I was talking to my sponsor about this today, and there's some people I'm not having conversation with, and I understand some people, they reach a point of frustration and not willing to educate. But a big part for me is like, if I care, I am going to have conversation. And I mention this because like when I think of this idea of privilege, I think of privilege as, okay, so I give an example. I'm not trans. I don't have to take into consideration the trans experience. I get to take into consideration. I think anything that I don't have to take into consideration affords me privilege.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think that, yeah.
Right. And when we're talking about the other part of privilege is that oftentimes when we're talking about privilege, we're talking about things that were not necessarily earned, right? Like you can be born into, say, a white body, right? And so there could be like white privilege. You can be born, your gender performance might be masculine, and so there might be like a cultural capital to like masculinity, right? So there are all of these things that a lot of times privilege is not something that we've earned.
Right.
And of course, then the opposite side of that is like privilege that like you can earn technically within like the strictest sense of the word, like, oh, like you work and you make certain money, so you have the privilege of using that money however the hell you see fit.
I think then that's what a lot of times when people are talking about this idea of privilege, they confuse. Like, I'm poor, so I don't have any privilege. Yeah, no, that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think one of the things
it is, but it's not entirely.
Yeah, exactly.
And it really just, I think the thing about it too is that privilege can change depending upon your environment.
100%.
And there might be certain things where like your transness might set you apart in one room, but in another room, it's your color, or it's your age, or it's, something else. So it can change depending on where you're at.
100%. And so like everything else, it can be situation specific. It can morph. Yeah. And just for folks listening, if you have any thoughts, we're live. So send us comments, questions.
Anthony will try not to be distracted.
I'll try not to be distracted. Okay. So let's jump in. So recovery, allyship and recovery. What are some of the first things that maybe come to mind to the two of you when you think about allyship and recovery?
Okay, so I think that like the worst thing, and this is early recovery, the worst thing when I'm holding myself accountable, like early recovery, I would have friends who would try to tell you, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, or try to keep an eye on you. And the truth of it is, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do.
Right.
So the best thing for you, like with the others, just to pay attention.
Yeah.
Back off,
And there might be some mindfulness about like, like if you're going to have people over at your house, that you have things that are not alcohol or drug, related, or if you do, you let the person know. Yeah. And for some people, it's important for the person in recovery to know those sorts of things, and for others, it's not a big deal. But I think again, it's kind of a mindfulness and really getting to know that person that you're in recovery with, and what is it that works for them, and asking them, how can I support you through this?
Yeah. I was also thinking about how allyship and recovery it takes on a lot of different forms. I think when it comes to like addiction, like either substance abuse or like substance addiction or process addiction, we were talking about this earlier. It's like allyship might just look like being patient with people who are coming into the room.
Absolutely,
right? Yeah. Like it's not like we're necessarily our best when we come in. Yeah. Is that a question? What's it say?
Yeah, it says, Veronica asked, how has privilege affected your recovery? Is your access to recovery easier with privilege?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I'm going to have to lean forward to read it again. Yeah. How has privilege affected your recovery? Is your access to recovery easier with privilege? That's a really good question. That takes some reflection for me. I think, it's sometimes it takes some reflection. I think the first thing that the first thing that comes to mind is, sometimes I forget that I have certain privileges, right? Like, for example, I know that like as a male and I'm walking down the street, I will sometimes see that someone might like move if they see me walking, right? Or I might notice that like in a room filled with women, I might notice myself be the first person to speak. And this is something like I saw in undergrad, sorry, not in undergrad, in graduate school. And so and so I started to learn like, oh, actually, maybe I could take a step back. Do I think it's, it's hard because I don't know that there's like a one-to-one relationship when it comes to recovery. Do I think that like there's certain privileges I have that have made recovery easier for me? I'm not sure. Mostly, I'm not sure because in recovery, like most of the time, like at least in early recovery, I felt batshit crazy. And so I'm not sure that like being batshit crazy, I was aware of anything that was, kind of making it easier.
Well, I think it's kind of what Bonnie was talking about it changes where you are. I've done most of my recovery here in the Castro. And so my gay cis male privilege has shown up in ways. I have so many options as far as meeting goes. The struggle has been a lot of times, and I hear like, especially here at the country club, there are folks who don't feel like, and lesbians don't feel like the space is open or welcoming. It's since changed a lot more. I mean, it's a lot more open, but I feel like it has made it easy. Like I feel like I belong at every meeting I go to until like I finally like woke up around the other issues, my blackness and whatever. You know?
Sure. When I think when AA or the 12-step programs are working properly, I think they can do a job of kind of leveling the privilege field to some degree. And I only say that maybe more around a socioeconomic status sorts of situations. You don't have to have money to go to these rooms, whereas like getting into a rehab or, accessing mental health or having a home during recovery can be privilege points, I guess. And that's only just like one way.
Yeah. You know what I'm reminded of is when people go over the timer.
Oh, yeah.
And to me,
what's a timer?
That drives me crazy.
I mean, the fact that there is timers.
That drives me crazy.
When I got sober, there wasn't timers.
Well, in a smaller meeting, I understand not having a timer, but it's like
But in a big meeting,
in a big meeting, when you go over, it's like that's when I think to myself, you know what? If you need to share more than your allotted time, then I'm going to encourage you to talk to somebody because it's a bigger issue.
Right.
So I was just going to clarify what the timer is. Were you going to do that?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so folks who may not be familiar with 12-step or the structure of some 12-step meetings. So some 12-step meetings, you have the opportunity to share from the floor. And a timer or a spiritual timer is someone who will give you a certain amount of time to share, and then when your time is up, you'll hear a timer go off. The idea behind this is to give as many people as possible a chance to share. So like Louis was saying, in a smaller meeting, you might not need that, but in a bigger meeting, you might need that. One other thing that I think is the thing that it tries to protect against is hostage taking. So hostage taking in a meeting setting is when someone shares like for a really, really long time. And they basically take the meeting.
What's interesting, and this is a sidebar, whatever. Yeah. There are some shares that you get so into,
right?
And you don't, and it doesn't matter that they go over just because of whatever is going on. So it's like,
but not in all meetings you have a privilege of like even say needing a timer or having a timer. So I think that's one thing that's really cool about program 2. It's like each meeting can kind of adapt to its people in a way that makes sense to them depending on where they're at. Because I know getting like in Idaho, there wasn't a lot of meetings that there wasn't a need for timers back then.
Yeah. I do like that about recovery in the meetings, is that that they're fully self-supporting, right? So going back to intersectional allyship, I'm thinking about in meetings, for example, like one of the issues that I've seen come up within like the last year or so, or at least people have been talking more about it, has been like sexual assault or like the issue of consent. And I'm reminded of this one time, for example, I was at a meeting And one of my sponsees was sitting next to someone who has been notorious for touching people and kissing people, etc. And I remember sitting across and I say to this person, leave him alone. And I was trying to be polite and I said, leave him alone. And at some point, this person snapped and they said, why don't you shut the fuck up? You should worry about it if I was going to take him home.
Oh.
And then the meeting started. It was at the Sunday meeting. And I remember thinking to myself in that situation, I felt like one is like, I felt like I just had like a paternal instinct because it was my sponsee. But there was also a part of me that was like, this is a younger person. This is a person of color. They're relatively new. And I felt like in that situation, I was like, I felt like this is the best that I could do. I could speak up in this.
I have a question for you. Do you feel like you were being an ally in that moment? Because one of the challenges that I have, or one of the things that I struggle with, just like you, I was always like that. Like I would see a young person or someone I perceived to maybe not be able to kind of advocate for themselves, and I would swoop in and want to protect them when they didn't ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair question, and I think I was right. Like I saw this person with their arm around him. I saw like how close they were getting to his neck, and it was I'm familiar with my sponsee's body language, so I was like, this isn't cool. This is like obviously uncomfortable. So I do think I was being an ally there, but I do hear your point, which is sometimes people don't need you to speak up for them. I had an experience like that not too long ago at one of the general planning meetings. I think it was like actually last year. I had spoken to someone and they told me that they were like, they felt like they needed my help, blah, 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 blah. So I showed up to the meeting to like help, like advocate for whatever it is that they wanted to advocate for. And you know what happened? They backpedaled and I was like, what? Yeah. So I'm like, you know what? This person never came right out and asked me to do it. Like I just kind of took it upon myself. So.
Yeah. This is kind of random, maybe that just was kind of coming up in mind when you were talking was, I think one thing that's really important about allyship too, is that it just doesn't happen when that person is in the room or that other community is in the room. I think it's really important. I think an easy way to talk about is like using somebody's pronouns, correct pronouns, even when they're not around, or correcting somebody else when they use the wrong pronouns, or correcting somebody who says something racist or homophobic or transphobic or whatever other horrible things that come out of people's mouths.
And specifically correcting people in your group.
Yeah.
Not just like, because it's like I'd like to go on the street and start correcting everybody.
Right.
But I think that we can only work within our space. And if I get to the people that can hear me, that can connect, that's when I'm doing my best work as an ally.
Well, and you can even like, if you have to like, it's like, say sometimes you have to like educate them on why you don't say that or you don't do that.
PowerPoint.
And don't do that in front of the person who is a representative of that community or whatever. Like, those are things that, that's why say white people talk to other white people about how, how to do it well. And you don't do like, because you can continue to harm people. Yeah, that you're allyship, that you're being an ally for, you're actually harming them more.
It's kind of like when your older brother or sister goes and confronts the bully that's bullying you, and it doesn't make it better. It just makes it worse because they're going to get you. Right.
I think that the fact that we're having this conversation during Pride Week, it feels in line, because I think about. This is something I've talked about with some friends before, is that, when I think about like the certain like rights that we fought for, from everything from like same-sex marriage to like being able to like hold a job and not get fired. Like when I think about all of these things, like they're not things that we did by ourselves, right? Like that we had a lot of straight women who were behind us, right? And some straight men too, right? And I think Pride is such a good example of what allyship can look like, not just in community, but like the power of what that looks like on a grander scale. And even before that, I think about like the civil rights movement and the allyship that was there, in community. And I think,
And also you can really see where intersectionality was not
100%.
considered.
Yeah.
Because you saw like, the white gays were getting their stuff, but then the black trans women or the, you know what I mean? Like there's or like the lesbians or the, like the different sorts of groups. So it's not necessarily like, intersectionality, I think hasn't always been considered.
Yeah, we saw that of course. Yes. And I think about like first, second, and third wave feminism. And we saw that play out with like women's suffrage and absolutely. And for sure, definitely when we think about, if we can make that even more nuanced, when we think about like LGBT rights, when the T was dropped off for a second because they were trying to push things through, right? Like that was a perfect example of, of like the intersect.
Right. And people will sometimes do it with the idea. I mean, there's been plenty of times over the years where gay people have been told to sit out or be quiet so that the better, like I think even with like the Black movement, there was a lot of like keeping the even though a lot of the homosexuals were doing the work, they were kind of had to take a back seat for the greater good.
Yeah, we've been having to have the conversation in the Black community about, you can't say that you're an ally, or you can't say that you stand for if you exclude. And unfortunately, that has been like the case. I was going to mention, I've been having a number of conversations, especially with new young men of color in recovery, where they are finally at that place where they're ready to talk about issues that are kind of tough about race or what have you. And it so happened that they may have chosen a sponsor that was not of color or could not understand or appreciate. And I'm pretty sure it happens with women, with trans. If you have a sponsor that can't get it and you're trying to have a conversation about something that is important to you, and because they don't understand, they don't validate it. And so they gaslight and what have you. And I think allyship or true allyship is, you don't have to completely understand, but at least validate that what I'm feeling is genuine for me,
Yeah. So in both of your opinions, where do you think is like a really good place to start? Like if someone is wanting to kind of rethink what intersectional allyship looks like, right? And I feel like you just shared something. I see a comment just came in.
It's from Jaylon.
Sometimes Jaylon says, sometimes I'm conflicted when it comes to allyship because it can be very performative and less genuine.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's like, I think a good place to start, first off, if you are concerned and care about an issue that is not necessarily your issue, start to educate yourself as best you can before you start speaking up and being or trying to center yourself. Oh man, I have a gripe. And I think I talked about this before. So they have this, how they have a flag for everything now? They have a flag for
allies.
For allies. And first off, the flag is ugly. And secondly, what it does is it frustrates me because, and I shared this before, is that if you feel like you are an ally and you need a flag to show that you're an ally, you might be centering yourself into something that you don't need to. And I feel like, if I had said before, like if I wanted to support trans rights, I get a trans flag and I fly that trans flag. The same true as for all of the other flags, because there's 1,000 of them. There's so many different flags. Oh my God, there's a lot of flags.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. I think that people are often overwhelmed at the idea of allyship, especially intersectional. I think a lot of people are afraid. A lot of well-minded, well-intended people who really want to be allies, who just go about it wrong, and they get overwhelmed by it, and they don't know how to deal with what comes with really being an ally. I think one of the worst things that I see happen is kind of tone policing. Like as an ally, when people say, well, okay, I hear you, I support you, but you don't have to yell, or you don't have to be so angry about it, or you don't have to it's like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like you get to hold that anger and you get to hold that stuff. And that's part of being an ally.
Yeah. And I feel like in a similarly, like you also don't have to be an ally, right? Like if, I think one of the things that needs to be acknowledged is that allyship can be difficult and often is difficult,
Mm.
right? It's one of the words I heard to describe, it might have been in that toolkit, was like, it's an arduous process, right? Like you're literally having to consider what you're saying,
Right.
what you're doing, how you're showing up. And of course, it doesn't have to be all the time, but what I'm getting at is that it's complex. In my opinion, it's a labor of love when done right.
Oh my God, we're already at 10 minutes.
Yeah,
we are already
Well,
at 10 minutes.
Sometimes in these conversations, I like the concept of cultural humility, because sometimes they'll talk about cultural competence or whatever, but I like the idea of cultural humility, because we can learn about what it's like, say, to be Black or to be a brown or to be gay or trans or whatever, and think like we learned it and then like label that for that's every trans person's experience, or that's whatever. And so cultural humility can allow everybody to kind of have their own experience without denoting the differences, I guess, as well.
Yeah, with the time that we have remaining, I'm wondering if y'all are okay with we're talking about like positive experiences we've had with allyship when folks have been allies to us. In the meantime, it looks like we have a comment.
Yes, Veronica says there is a definite paradigm shift going on with older generation when it comes to intersectionality and recovery. It's viewed as an outside issue, but far from it. Not everyone will get it, so I can connect with others in recovery who feel the same way and create an event, meeting, etc. that speaks to that experience.
Thank you, Veronica.
Yes.
Yeah, one of to speak directly to your comment, thank you for it, is that in some meetings something might seem like an outside issue, in another meeting it won't. One of the things that's really interesting to me about meetings and recovery is that we have all types of people that come together, and sometimes opinions seem spot on, and sometimes opinions they miss the mark, right?
But that's coming from a space of privilege. I think if you're saying, "Oh, that's an outside issue,"
right, because you don't want to hear it. It's
you're not recognizing that it is an issue for that person.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, Louis, you said this in a couple episodes ago, which is, if something has the ability to impact your recovery, that is not an outside issue.
Yeah, and I want to qualify. I heard that in a PLC meeting. I heard this amazing trans woman get up and share passionately. I was speaking, and so it wasn't mine. It's not original, but I have been wearing it like a badge. If it has the ability to affect my serenity, then I get to work the steps around it.
100%. So examples of times where you felt like you had a really a good or beautiful experience with allyship, like being on the receiving end of it.
Okay, so this was not in recovery, but I'm pretty sure.
It's okay.
Okay, so after the George Floyd thing, I was feeling, and I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, and didn't know that I needed help. The owner at my job called me in, and I thought I was in trouble. And we had a conversation, and she asked me how I was doing with that, and encouraged me to take a few days off. And I think that I've definitely had instances like that in recovery where folks see what's going on, they see me, and almost like how you said you kind of know like the body language from your sponsor, and they check in, but they check in a way where it's like it's not about trying to make me feel better, but simply just trying to check in and letting me if I need to, and being okay if I don't want to.
Yeah, it sounds like that person let you have your experience, and then created room for you.
And I was always going to take time off at work. I'm all sure.
Right. One thing that stands out for me is I have a podcast with my aunt who's a conservative Christian, and
Splintered Grace.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to plug it.
Plug.
But she, and learning allyship and trying to teach with her has been overwhelming at times, but she's also done it really well. And she's advocated for my pronouns and my name. I recently went back home to Wendell with all my family members and stuff, and she called me by my name and used my pronouns, even though everyone else around me wasn't. And so I felt like that was a really great form. And I think she was also talking to people outside when I'm not around about how they, they might do well to call me Bonnie Violet or whatever.
I love that. I'm thinking of a recent experience, and then also professionally. So in a lot of the professional spaces that I'm in, they tend to be actually they almost are almost entirely white. And not just white, like white and affluent and like old money, because it's a really old profession. And some certain spaces can be really difficult to enter, right? Because it's not, you don't have the connections, or you don't have, right, you don't know the right things to say, And so professionally, I actually one of my first experiences with this was my second year of grad school. There was a white trans woman who knew of a placement that I wanted. And she basically was like, "Girl, I got you." And she pulled me aside and she's like, looked at my cover letter. We like talked about what the interview might sound like, and she like set me up. And I interviewed and I did really well, and I ended up getting the spot. And that was the first time I experienced that professionally. And then personally, and like, so I'm like, I'm treading lightly around this, but I've been seeing someone, and it's the first time I've ever like been in a relationship with someone who's white, right? Like this, like the level of this relationship. And I can remember like the first time, I just kind of like, and just happened to be talking about something that happened to me in childhood, right? And like things that I just kind of like take for granted, because I'm like, yeah, who hasn't seen a drive-by shooting? Right. You know what I mean? Like, like who hasn't seen a drive-by shooting? Like who hasn't walked by a dead body? Like who hasn't seen drug dealing? Who has, you know what I mean? Like who hasn't? And I remember I was just like talking about it, and there was this moment where he was like, you've lived with that your whole life. You know what I mean? And there was like this tenderness around it. And I thought to myself, oh shit, no one's ever done that. No one's ever heard that and said, that must have been hard. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, save for my therapist. And that, like, in both of those instances, professionally and interpersonally, like, I felt so like held and seen. And it just meant so much to me that like someone who lives outside of my community, who will probably never know what those experiences are like actually kind of had a moment with me. Yeah.
I think one of the big problems with allyship, or where it can lack and allyship, but also just kind of being on the side of somebody else or a group of people. I think there's this belief that we have to understand somebody, and like the goal is to seek to understand, and that's not what it's about. We're never going to fully understand one another. And so, and you don't have to understand me to be kind to me, right, or to see me, or, so I think that's the thing that we've gotten. We try so hard to understand everything. And if we don't understand it, then it must not be, or something.
That's such a beautiful point. It's such a beautiful point, right? Because sometimes, like I've worked with people where like they might, there's so many thoughts that are coming to my head right now, but I'm just thinking about like those moments where I have like been across someone and I didn't understand it, but all I needed to understand was that like I'm sitting across someone who's in pain. Yep. That's it. Like, you're in pain. Like, I don't need to know what's happening. I just know that like someone I care about is in need of comfort. That's all I need to know.
Believe them.
That's it.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
it. And sometimes, that's some of the best allyship that I've experienced. Brandon just chucked up fingers at us. There were, but there were three. So
the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
We provide programs, and I was like, I want to be
go for it.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support.
Yes, and you can find more information, including all the ways to contact us at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast. /podcast. You know what I'm saying.
That slash.
Bonnie Valley, you want that one?
Yeah, tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m.-ish Pacific Standard Time when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, and if you're if you're watching us, what's the thing that I want to say? The 15 minutes. So as usual, we will continue our conversation 15 minutes after we stop rolling. For that content, find us on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can only listen to the audio.
You can only listen to the audio.
Okay.
And it's where we get really...
They're going to hit the button.